Hey, I'm really happy to be here with Chris Finill today. How you doing, Chris?
I'm very well, thanks, Jim.
Oh man, I was so fortunate to get to meet Chris and his friend Steve on their epic crossing run across America. So tell us before we get into your actual crossing, where you're from, Chris. Where you and Steve
I'm
are from.
I'm actually live in Cranley, which is about 30 miles south of London, and originally I was born in North London, in a place called Harrow.
And Steve?
Steve is from St Helens, which is a town quite close to Liverpool, and he currently lives in Sheffield, which is where he went to university, which is another northern town, but it's further east in Yorkshire.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool that you had a running partner all the way across the country. And I won't give up the stories in your chapter, but I was so intrigued by one thing that you said at the end is you guys did not have one argument all the way across the country. So you talk about two good friends. That's impressive.
Yeah, we had such a shared goal, and we knew we experimented with running together a couple of years beforehand just to make sure it would work, because clearly the chemistry between the two of us was very, very important. So we realised once we were actually on the start line in Half Moon Bay that things were probably going to work out, but obviously we're all under a lot of pressure at the time. But yeah, very, very happy to say that we had a very good relationship, and that relationship lasts way beyond the run itself.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, I follow a whole lot of crossers across America, and you're the only ones that I know that did it as, too. So tell us, if you don't mind, how it is you came up with the idea or what sparked you and Steve to run across America.
Well, I suppose you really have to go back to the roots of it all. And Steve had been running for about 15 years by the time we started to kick it around as an idea. I'd been running more or less since I was 10 or 11. So the idea of running long distances was something that was developing in me, from the time I was 20 when I was running my marathons to the time when I was mid 30s running ultras. Steve started running ultras. We met each other at an ultra race. He came and stayed with me one weekend a year later, and gave me the Jim Shapiro book as a thank you. Rather than a bottle of wine or a box of chocolates, he gave me this book, and I started reading Jim's book. And I'm a terribly slow reader, and I read it in 24 hours, and I got to the end and read it again. Steve and I started joking about how we were going to run across America in a rather sort of nonchalant, semi-serious way. And then as time progressed over the course of maybe a month or two, we started to think, well, maybe we should do this. Maybe we can do this. And that's when the idea really took hold. So Jim's book wasn't the reason we ran across America, but it was the tipping point that took us from being relatively serious ultra runners to the point where we thought we are going to have a crack at something a bit more ambitious.
Well, it's awesome. And Chris and Steve have a chapter in this book that you see on the screen, Across America on Foot. Chris and Steve wrote one chapter. I and 25 other men and women who have walked or have run across the country wrote this book, Across America on Foot. It will be available on Amazon sometime in March. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and we'll get full screen here. So, so tell us where you started from and where you finished and how you selected the start and finish point.
Right. Well, we realised we wanted to run from west to east. My sister at the time was living in New Jersey, so there was a sense of running towards her or running to a kind of permanent base in the States if we ran west east. So we were originally going to run off Golden Gate Bridge, and then when we started to look into the detail of it, we realised as pedestrians that was actually quite a complicated thing to do in terms of navigating through San Francisco. And also, we didn't actually start in the ocean if we started on the bridge. So we selected some place a little south of San Francisco called Half Moon Bay. And Half Moon Bay was selected for no real reason other than the fact that we liked the name. So that's the reason we ran from Half Moon Bay. And with my sister living near Princeton in New Jersey, we obviously decided we were going to run to New York. And the intention, given that we had a 90-day visa, was to spend 5 days at the start preparing, 80 days running it, 5 days at the end, including the New York Marathon, which was scheduled for the first Sunday in November of 2011.
Yeah, you talk about pressure running across country and reading your chapter. I know that you got to New York the night before the New York City Marathon started.
That's
That is,
right.
that is some serious pressure, Chris.
Yeah, we actually picked up our running numbers in New York as we were running through to complete the run at Brighton Beach. And we finished at Brighton Beach at about 6 o'clock in the evening. And we were running the New York Marathon. I think it was 9 o'clock the following morning. So luckily, we'd only run 280 miles in the previous 7 days. So we were well prepared.
Well, you guys have so many interesting stories in your chapter, but kind of early on, I don't know if it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, but fill us in on when you started having pain in your leg and what the diagnosis was and what you did about it.
Yeah, we were about 400 miles in, which I think took us through the Central Valley of California and into Nevada. And as we were in Nevada and coming towards Utah, the lower part of my left tibia, about 4 inches above the ankle, started to hurt, and it clearly wasn't going to go away, and there was no chance of resting. So, yeah, and long story short, it just got worse and worse to the point where we were in Delta in Utah and stopped off to see a physio who was a doctor as well, but he professed to be, and I'm sure he was, an expert on stress fractures because of the very hard ground they have in Utah and the fact that they often see stress fractures there because of the terrain. Anyway, he said, you have a stress fracture of the tibia, you need to stop running immediately. So having organized this trip for 3 years, I couldn't really afford to believe him, even if he had the credentials to make the right diagnosis. So I asked for a second opinion. And the second opinion guy walked in and said, yeah, you've got a fracture of the lower left tibia. You need to stop running. It's only going to get worse. And I kind of negotiated with him a bit to say, well, if I just walk on it instead of run on it, is that going to make it worse? And they said, well, probably. But anyway, it was clearly my decision in the end. So we walked, Steve and I walked for about 5 days, and we walked about 35 miles each day, which took a long, long time, just so that we didn't lose too much of our miles in the bank relative to the time we were taking. And then we took 1 day off completely when it seemed to be getting no better at all. And then the following day, I started to run on it, or started to walk on it again very gingerly. And over the course of about a week, it actually improved. And what happened was my hair stopped growing, my nails stopped growing, my beard stopped growing. It seemed like everything was channeled towards fixing this problem with my leg. And I don't know whether it was a stress fracture or not, but two clinicians said it was. But fortunately for me, it somehow got better over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, and by the time we got to the Rockies, we were feeling quite strong. I was feeling quite strong again, and obviously fairly upbeat. But as the doctor said, I dodged a bullet. He didn't quite understand what had happened, but I was very pleased that things worked out.
It's truly incredible, and it kind of shows the power of the mind and the body. It's so much more powerful than what we believe.
Yes.
And I was also very impressed with the amount of mileage that you guys ran. If I remember, you didn't take a whole lot of rest days either. Tell us about the average mileage, like low mile, high miles per day, and how many rest days you took.
We were pretty consistent. We averaged just under 40 miles a day, but the big day miles were only 42, 43, 44. And the average days would say 38, 39, and we were always over 35, even when we were walking. So we had this goal of getting to New York for the New York Marathon, but of course the stress fracture made that look less and less likely at one point. But luckily we picked it up again as we got to the easier terrain of places like Illinois and Indiana.
And some people run unsupported, and I personally ran with a support vehicle, and you guys did as well, correct?
Yeah, I have nothing but admiration for people that run unsupported. I cannot get my head around that at all. We had my wife Julia driving a support vehicle all the way across. In fact, the vehicle clocked up 9,000 miles to support our 3,100 mile run, and we had a guy called Ben Southern, who made a documentary of our run as well. So we were very well supported. We didn't RV it. We simply, at the end of the day, put a marker on the road, drove off to the nearest motel, sat in a bath for as long as we dared, ate, went to bed, repeated ad nauseam until we headed east.
Well, as you and a lot of other crossers know, I and many of us like to follow different crossers. You know, after we've run or walked across country, it's fun to follow other crossers. And I was following you and Steve, and I told you when you got into Ohio, I'd meet up with you, and I sure did up in northern Ohio. And it was so interesting because I ran, I think, maybe 5 or 6 miles with you. Ran, walked. I had asthma at the time, so I couldn't run like a half a day with you. And you guys were gracious enough to walk with me. But what a couple things blew me away. But number one was you told me that you and Steve, your instead of a whole lot of water, you did drink water, but you milk was kind of your mainstay for fluid. Can you can you
Absolutely.
can you talk a little bit about that? Because I've never
Yeah.
met another ultra runner.
Yes, the whole thing was fueled by dairy, basically, especially out west when we were drinking all the time in the intense heat of the deserts. But my take on it is obviously milk is highly hydrating. It's mainly water, but it's also very nutritious, and it has protein in it, and for whatever reason, my body seems to crave it when I'm in the middle of some really intense exercise, and I find it nothing other than nourishing and uplifting, really, in terms of feeling replenished.
And just to give us an idea, I mean, how much milk? Like I was at around 2 gallons of water a day. You know, with certainly some supplements and some additives. But how much water versus milk? Was it like 50-50, or was it more milk? Or
Um, I think in the extremes of the desert, we were taking iced water as well as milk. But I would guess that 2/3 of my fluid intake was milk along the way. Maybe Steve was probably less, but we used to vary it. You know, it used to be a point of daily excitement as to whether it's banana milkshake or strawberry or chocolate. But you varying it as well gave us these little nuggets of treats to look forward to as we were wading our way across.
and the other thing that you reminded me just before we started this little interview that when I did run with you there for 5 or 6 miles, what was it that we found along the road? You know, when you're
Yeah.
running across country, you find literally dozens, if not sometimes hundreds of things along the
Yeah,
road.
yeah,
In
yeah.
in just
Oh,
five miles, in just 5 miles, what did we find?
it's a, it was a complete revelation as to what things you come across along the way. We found some extraordinary things along the way, but with our particular very short stretch with you of only 5-10 miles, I think we started off by finding a screwdriver, which was, kind of standard fare to find by the side of the road. But more interesting, we found a watch, again in this 10-mile slot with you, and a nickel and a dime that had been tarmacked to the road, presumably by a road worker at some peak of boredom, however many years ago. So we used the screwdriver that we just found to prise off the nickel and the dime. So there was a very circular kind of feel to that. And just in honor of the fact that we ran together in Ohio, Jim, I felt I had to just
Oh, cool.
show you that one. I think we found that maybe 50 miles further on from where you were. But of course, license plates are quite common out there as well, and great souvenirs of each state.
That's awesome. And then the other thing that I found amazing, because the Jim Shapiro book I ran across in 2002, and that's the only book I could find at that time of someone who had run across country, written a book, Jim Shapiro. What was the title of it? Do you remember?
It was Meditations from the Breakdown Lane. But
Yes.
before we go on to Jim, I'll just point out that one of the other major books written on the subject was 4 Million Footsteps by Bruce Tulloh, who held the record as an Englishman. I just thought I'd get that
Yes.
in the late 60s. Now Bruce, who sadly departed quite recently, was a European 5,000 meter champion, as well as the guy that ran across the States in 64 days. So that gives you some idea of his range and his immense talent, and what a lovely guy as well. But moving on to Jim Shapiro, yes, Meditations from the Breakdown Lane was the book, and I found it an absolutely enthralling, fascinating, intelligent read, and I was completely drawn in.
I felt the same way, and honestly, I don't know that I would have run across without Jim's book. But you mentioned in your chapter, and I didn't realize this until I reread your chapter again over the weekend, that surprisingly to you and to Steve, Jim showed up at the end of your run. Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't a complete surprise because we had let him know that we were heading to New York, knowing he lived in New York. But it was a huge honor for him to be there for us. And we finished on a Saturday evening, and he'd been working that day, but he cleared his diary so he could be at Brighton Beach to witness us finishing and running into the ocean. But we were a couple of hours late because we'd been held up picking up our numbers for the New York Marathon. So he was standing around from about 4 o'clock. And very appropriately, and again completely by chance, it was an absolutely beautiful evening, and there was this most amazing sunset, which happened almost within 5 minutes of us completing our run. So we finished on the beach. My sister was there, my wife was there, my son was there, my brother-in-law was there, my niece was there, Jim Shapiro was there, and then we just celebrated, and it was a really, really magical moment.
And the next day running the marathon, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what your times were. And did you guys stick together? Was it somewhat competitive?
We did. We went back to my niece's flat in Brooklyn. She made us a cake, so a transatlantic American cake in the shape of the States. So we ate that, or most of it. Then we got back to my sister's house near Princeton at about midnight. Then we were up at 3:30 to drive to the point where the coach was waiting to take us to Staten Island. And we got to Staten Island, I'm guessing, in a couple of hours before the race started, with very little sleep. And then we obviously started running the race. And we ran it together. We ran it pretty conservatively because we had an enormous number of miles in our legs. But we did showboat a bit towards the end, and we ran the last couple of miles sub 6 minutes, overtaking people who were, feeling the effects of a marathon, whereas we were completely euphoric and delirious, really, because of the fact that we were now, not only had we achieved our goal the previous day, but we were euphoric, really, in the sense that we knew that this was the end. As we approached the end of the New York Marathon, this was the end of the journey in the most symbolic sense, and it was an extraordinary feeling.
I mean, that's an unbelievable finish. Just the timing, the sunset, Jim Shapiro, the day before the New York City Marathon. And then you say, you ran it somewhat conservatively and you finished with sub 6 minutes miles. Unlike a lot of you other guys, some of you guys who have run across country, I've never run a 7-minute mile in my life. And after running 3,000 miles, you guys run 26.2 miles and finish with, that's unbelievable, 2 sub 6 minute miles.
But it was the moment. It was just a moment in my life, a moment in Steve's life. We will never forget that. And we were just so exuberant, I suppose, with what we'd achieved. And it hadn't been straightforward, and obviously not even living in America, it had taken an awful lot of planning, and there were doubts as to whether we could achieve it and whether we'd get to New York in time, but it all just fell into place, and it was wonderful.
Well, I'll tell you what, you guys, people will love reading your chapter. You have so many interesting tidbits in there. I absolutely loved it. I wish we could talk about it all here, but we can't take that much time. But anyway, Across America on Foot, 27 different walkers and runners who have crossed America wrote this book. It'll be available on Amazon sometime in March. And I don't know when or where, Chris, but I am sure that we will meet up again, and I so look forward to it.
Jim, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and you have a permanent invitation to come to England and meet up with Julia, myself, Steve, and Ben. If you can make it, we'll organize a reunion.
Well, that is absolutely going to happen. Trust me, I will let you know. Across America on Foot, thanks so much, buddy.
Many thanks.